This story happened about 2 years ago when I was 19, and my foster sister Kira was 16. For the sake of the story, it's important to know that it was female presenting and hadn't come out as trans yet, nor was I presenting myself in an overtly masculine style at the time. It was the summer before I was going to college, and I mostly lived with my mom and Kira except for every other weekend, where I'd stay with my dad. Now, summers where I am can get really hot and humid, so we had a habit of waiting to walk the dogs until about 6 or 7 p.m., because that's when it would be cooler but still light outside. On this particular evening, Mom wasn't going to be home until late though. I don't remember the exact reason why. She is a woman that likes to stay busy and often participates in choirs, Bible studies, youth group events, classes, and more. So it wasn't uncommon for Kira and I to be left home alone until about 8 or 9 p.m. at night. So it was up to me and Kira to walk the dogs by ourselves, unless we wanted our younger dog, Samson, to throw tantrums due to pent-up energy. Even though we lived in the countryside and could have walked them down our street, Kira and I decided to drive out 20 minutes to a park instead. Why, I don't remember. It could have been anything from being bored walking our roads to not wanting to have to deal with blind curves and hills. Whatever the reason, at around 7:30 p.m., Kira and I had harnessed our 2 dogs, packed them up in the car, and drove to the park. Now let me quickly explain the layout of the park so that it's easier to understand why we got nervous halfway through our walk. This park isn't very big, but it's popular because of its loop. The entire park is surrounded by a mile-long looping road with its attractions, like playgrounds, ponds, and a small country hall, spaced about on the inner side of the loop. The outer side is just grass, trees, and one playground at its end. Thus, it's common and expected to pass people walking the loop at least 2 times if you're walking in the opposite directions, but not if you're walking in the same direction, obviously. Many cars on this road can only drive in one direction because it's a one-way road. At first, everything about this walk seemed normal. I parked the car, we clipped our dogs to leashes, and we started on the loop. Every so often, we'd stop so I could take pictures of our good boys, particularly of Kira trying to wrangle Samson, who pulls like his life depends on it, and weaves around cause he wants to smell everything. It was while I was taking one of these pictures that the first encounter had happened. A man who looked to be in his 40s had walked past us, walking the same direction that we were, up towards the playground on the outer side of the loop. We smiled at Kira and nodded, said hello or cute dogs or something like that, and kept walking. I honestly didn't think anything of it. We're at a park at a time of day where it's common to walk around due to the cooler temperature, and people where I am are generally friendly. Smiling and saying hi is pretty normal, no matter who says it. We smiled back, maybe said hi or thanks depending on what he said, and that was that. Or so we thought. The man passed us again only about 10 minutes later, and directly across from where we had seen him previously, just like he did before. He smiled and said, hi. This time Kira and I looked at each other once he was ahead of us and stared. Well, that was weird, that kind of expression. Just 10 minutes earlier, he had passed us walking up towards the playground, and subsequently broke off from the loop, and he had been walking in the same direction as us. This time, though, he had cut in front of us, and he did it in a way where we had to stop to avoid running into him. Heck, he nearly touched Kira with how close he was walking. That was already weird in and of itself. The other weird part of him cutting past us in the opposite direction. The only way he could have done that was if he had cut across the inside of the loop, since it would have been close to impossible to pass us at a certain point from the other direction if he had decided to walk the opposite way of the loop than us. It came off almost like he wanted to walk by us again, But just like before, Kira and I brushed this weirdness off. The guy could have been enjoying a rambling stroll and done his own thing for all we knew. And besides, we had 2 reasonably sized dogs with us. Who would mess with us? Not even 5 minutes later, this man passed us again. Once again, and cutting so close past us that he nearly brushed his shoulders with Kira. Again, he smiled and said hi before walking off. This was officially the moment that I decided we needed to leave. Sure, it's normal to pass a person at least 2 times walking this loop, if you're going in opposite directions, but doing so takes a while. You have to at least get to the parallel spot on the loop from where your paths first intersected to see each other again. Both the time between running into the guy and the location that we had passed each other didn't match up in a way that didn't look suspicious. Plus, I really wasn't a fan of how he cut across us. The first time he passed us like a normal person walking faster than us would, albeit a little close. The second time he had cut in front of us from the opposite direction instead of walking around us, to the point that we had to stop to avoid running into him. This third time he walked up behind us, then he did this weird directionally slant walk across the street and go in the opposite direction, cutting us off again. So yeah, I told Kira to hustle so we could get to our car and get out instead of doing a second loop, so that's what we did. When we were almost to our car, we noticed a car creeping along behind us. We pulled to the side and stopped to let it pass, but for a second it stopped too. We figured that the car was getting ready to park, so we started walking again. The car started creeping along behind us soon after we did, so we stopped again and the car stopped with us. This was when Kira got nervous. We hadn't seen the middle-aged guy since the third cutoff, so we figured that I had overthought the whole thing. But here we were, with this tinted windowed car acting weird as heck behind us. Was it the same guy but back in his car? A different guy? We couldn't tell. Before anything could happen though, another car idled up to the one next to us, and whoever it was sped up to the expected 5 miles per hour. We got to our car pretty fast after that and practically picked up the dogs to get them inside of it. We got in and got out of there. My mistake, however, was neglecting my rearview mirror and the well-advised rule not to drive straight home if you're worried a stranger's taking too much interest in you. I was anxious, dumb, and primarily concerned with getting home where we could be safe. Because home is supposed to be safe, right? My naive, false sense of security. I think we got home around 8-something. The sun had finally disappeared behind the horizon, but it wasn't fully dark yet. Just that dusty purple color the sky gets before it finally accepts that it's nighttime. Mom wasn't home yet, so we got the dogs some water, locked the doors, ate a late dinner, and chilled in the living room, talking about things that didn't really matter. It was almost 9:30 when the scariest part of this whole ordeal had happened. There, Kira and I were sitting on different couches, talking about something or other when we noticed the ceiling briefly light up over where Kira was sitting. An important note here is that Kira was sitting on a small couch with her back to a window that faces out to the front of our house, while I was on a couch on the opposite wall, where I could see a sliver of the front porch. Likewise, right next to Kira was our front door, which has 3 small rectangular windows on it. Due to our long and slightly curvy driveway, it's common to see headlights stream through that window, light up the ceiling, fade, and then intensify. It means that somebody is just coming home. So when the ceiling above Kira lit up, we thought nothing of it, assuming Mom had finally come back from wherever she went that night, and we didn't take any notice of the light skipping the final arc of someone pulling all the way up the driveway either. We also didn't pay any mind to how long it was taking Mom to come inside. Mom had a habit of pulling in and then checking her phone for God knows how long before coming inside. Right after the light went off, we both heard the storm door open, but we didn't hear anyone pressing the code keys of her lock or jiggling the door handle, like Mom usually does right away. The moment the storm door creaked open, our 2 dogs jumped up and ran to the door, barking like mad. Our golden greyhound mix, Calvin, has a deep, scary bark, which contradicts his adorable appearance. Samson, our dumb goofball son who was incapable of hurting a fly but a big boy, jumps up on his hind legs and scrambles to find purchase on one of the small windows in a desperate attempt to see who's outside. Immediately, the storm door slammed shut, and we heard heavy footsteps on the cement porch. Calvin started going nuts and jumped up on Kira's couch, standing on its back instead of the cushions to look out the window. Samson ran out of the room and went out of the doggy door that leads to the back porch, which has a ramp going down into a fenced-off portion of our yard. I couldn't move. I had never understood really what it meant when people described their limbs turning to lead until that moment. It felt like I didn't have limbs, really. Like moving wasn't an option. If I moved, I might glimpse something or someone through the windows. The person could see me running around the house, freaking out, and decide to come after us after all. So I sat there, my mind steadily going blank as my heart sped up, and my limbs refused to move. In the game of fight, flight, or freeze, I'm the freezer. And Kira, on the other hand, is a fighter. She spins around and looks out the window but can't see anything because, besides the emotion light on the porch, it's too dark. So naturally, she gets up and grabs a stray dog toy, which just so happens to be a tug-of-war rope with a ball on one end, and opens the door. I tell her very calmly to shut the door and stay inside, but she ignored me and stepped out onto the porch. She comes back inside after not saying anything, but to my utter disbelief, she disappears to the kitchen, comes back with a knife and goes outside again. This time she's gone for a handful of seconds before running back inside and slamming the door shut. Breathless, she tells me that she went on a bit into the yard and saw the outline of a man by the rundown dog kennel that we don't use anymore. When she saw him and froze, he moved. This time, she listened to me when I told her to lock the door. I managed to call Mom despite my head being empty and my limbs being lead, and she convinced me to get up, make sure that all the doors were locked, including the basement, and making sure that the dogs were inside. I ended up making Kira go into the fenced-up section to drag Samson back inside, because I couldn't get my legs to move after thinking about doing it myself. Cowardly, I know. After Mom got home and looked around, finding nothing, we called the non-emergency number for the police, not wanting to bother them in case we were overreacting. 2 cops came by and walked around our yard and found nothing. We got the sense they didn't believe us, but instead saw us as 2 overexcited girls with exaggerated imaginations. But still, they humored us and told us, after we had told them about the park, that if we think that anyone might be following us or if someone's acting a little too creepy, not to drive straight home and to check if anyone's following us. And then they laughed. To this day, I'm pretty sure the only people who believe someone with malicious intent came to our home in hopes of finding 2 teenage girls is Kira and me. Though whether or not whoever it was the guy from the park, we're not sure. But it's too coincidental, isn't it? That the day that we have multiple encounters with this guy, who goes out of his way to get close to us and a car inch-long behind us, we also have an almost intruder encounter. Plus, there were too many details that didn't add up to us having overly excited imaginations. We both saw headlights. The motion detector on the porch had turned on. The storm door had opened and stayed open until Samson had jumped up to look out the door's window. It's a very noisy door and makes sounds when opening and closing. We had heard footsteps. Kira had saw someone. And the dogs don't run up to the door like that and bark their heads off if no one's there. I don't know if whoever was at our house was the same guy that ran into us at the park. If it was, I don't know if the reason he cut in front of us as close as he did was to test how our dogs would react to him, and then not caring at all the first time, wagging their tails convinced him that they weren't a threat. I don't know if he was in the car that inched behind us and stopped when we stopped. I don't know what would have happened if Calvin didn't have a scary manic bark, or if Samson wasn't tall enough to look out the high windows on the door. I don't know much of anything. What I do know is this. If you're out and about, minding your own business, and a stranger is taking a lot of notice of you, following you, frequently running into you, or whatever, trust your gut. Don't drive or walk straight home, meander, get to a public space, or just take your time. Pay attention to your surroundings. You never know who's watching you. So, I was around 15 or 16 at the time, and my mom, dad, and I were on a family trip to New York City. It was a really good trip at first. We visited the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, Times Square, and etc. And for the most part, it was a normal vacation. But towards the end of our trip was when everything went to crap. It was our last day there and we were trying to get back to the airport, so we decided to take an Uber. A couple minutes pass and a gray Civic pulls up to the sidewalk that we were on. I remember noticing that he had Lyft and Uber stickers on his car in multiple places, almost excessively. It kind of felt like he was trying to prove that he was our Uber. It was just a small thing, but looking back, I really wish that I took more concern about how sus this guy was. Moving on, we were running late, so I'm guessing my dad didn't really pay attention to the license plate, because this guy was definitely not an Uber driver. He was a lanky man wearing clothes akin to rags and looked like he was drugged out by the time, but nothing seemed off to us. Again, we were running late and what happened was the least of our expectations. The ride was normal until we got to the airport. We all expected him to get off at the highway and let us off, but he didn't. Instead, he casually continued down the highway past where we wanted to be dropped off at. This was when my dad noticed that the man didn't have a meter or his phone set up with the Uber GPS open. We were starting to get worried and my dad asked him in a stern voice, "Excuse me, where's your meter?" The man stayed silent, flustered, so he asked once more, this time yelling, "Where's your meter?" Again, no reply. But at this point, the man started dashing down the highway, weaving past other cars and just driving very dangerously. We were all panicking. My dad was screaming at him to let us off. My mother was crying and praying with her rosary clutched firmly in her fist, and I was in shock. I froze up. I couldn't even cry or scream as much as I so desperately wanted to. I was completely immobilized. This continued for a while, driving down an unfamiliar road to God knows where, with the car only getting faster and faster. I started having those classic end-of-the-road type thoughts like, holy crap, this might be it and there's nothing that I can do about it. But luckily, we were saved. I don't know if we passed by it or if someone in a car we passed had called the cops, but we soon heard sirens blaring behind us, and we were being tailed at high speed by multiple police cars. One of the cops had a megaphone or something to amplify their voice, and screamed out for the man to pull over. Obviously, he put up a fight and the police had to actually cut him off for him to finally stop. The police helped us out of the car and got all of our things from the trunk while putting blankets around us and telling us that it was gonna be okay and that we were safe. At this moment, I felt the biggest wave of relief wash over me that I had ever felt in my life. Don't get me wrong, it still messed with me and my family apart, and I was still left pretty traumatized, but I was at least glad that me and my family were alive and safe. The police gave us a ride back to the airport and everything went as planned from that point on. But holy crap, am I glad that I never had to find out where this guy was taking us and what he was planning to do with us. Just thinking about it gives me the goosebumps. I guess the moral of the story is to always check the license plate before going in an Uber or a Lyft. That feature on the app that tells you what it is exists for a good reason.